Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. This is the Saturday version of Ohio Exopolitics, where we talk about the Meier material, the information that Billy Edward Albert Meier has given to the world. Edward Albert Meier is a one-armed farmer from Switzerland. He lives in a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmidruti, which is in the Glatt Valley. He's about an hour away from Zurich or so, and he's 77 years old now. He's had extraterrestrial contacts since about the age of 5 years old, and many of these contacts have been documented in contact notes. There are over 600 booklets that he's written, and the booklets describe verbatim what took place in these discussions that he's had with extraterrestrial humans over the years. Some of the booklets are maybe a page, others are over 100 pages, and on top of that, Billy's written 40 books, so he's an incredibly prolific author. And according to the Meier material, his spirit form is the oldest spirit form on the Earth, and perhaps the oldest spirit form in the entire universe, for that matter. Edward Albert Meier's contacts began when he was about 5 years old. He would get these telepathic messages to go out in the Oregon forest there in Bulak. And then out of the sky would come a silvery pear-shaped craft, which would land usually at a clearing in the field there. SFATH would come out and lead Billy back into the ship. And while Billy was on the ship, one of the things that SFATH often told him about was his previous incarnations here on the Earth. And Edward Albert Meier has been Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. For the past 13,000 years or so, he has incarnated on the Earth, usually as a prophet or a teacher. There were three Henochs. We call them Enoch. Probably the most important Henoch was the Henoch that was born around 9,000 years ago. And that Henoch wrote the Henoch prophecies. Of course, Henoch is another incarnation of the spirit form that resides in Edward Albert Meier. That spirit form is known by the extraterrestrials as Nocodamian. And it says in, I think, Contact 238, that Nocodamian led his people from the depths of the known universe into the oldest space-time shifted regions of Lyra Vega in our Milky Way galaxy, and that occurred millions, probably billions of years ago. So this spirit form that's been incarnating on the Earth for the past 13,000 years ago has had previous lives on other worlds where he's also been a teacher. Billy's contacts really involve two extraterrestrial races. One race, they call themselves the Plejaren. They are not from our Pleiades. Originally, they allowed themselves to be called the Pleiadians, but they are not from our Pleiades. They are from another star system, some 80 light years beyond our Pleiades, in a different space and time configuration. They live in a finer dimension than we do, and they live in harmony with nature. They don't do any manufacturing on their world. They call their world Era, and their world is in the Plejaren star system. They keep their population very low, at about 500 million people. All of their manufacturing is done off planet. They don't use money anymore. They only have to work about 2 hours a day. They spend the rest of their time on things that they enjoy, particularly spiritual related things. There are people that have really focused more on growing spiritually and having a spiritual understanding of what life is all about. The Plejaren themselves left the Earth in about 1995. They wouldn't tell us why. They, at that time, had bases in North America, bases in Switzerland, and bases in Asia. The bases in Switzerland have been here for about 350 years. They closed all their bases up. There was also a base they had created in I believe it was in the North Sea. And they had brought another extraterrestrial group here called the Hasters. And according to the people in Switzerland now, the Hasters are gone as well. The Hasters were from another galaxy, but were very similar to Earth humans in terms of evolution. So they were very compatible. They could be in our presence for up to 17 hours. They could tolerate our vibrations for about 17 hours before they would have any negative effects. But they left as well in 1995. We don't know why. The main contact time was between 75 and 86. And during that time, there were 2,862 extraterrestrial humans on the Earth. And wearing a kind of protective gear, electronic devices, they could walk among us for brief periods of time. And last week we talked about Semjase actually bought an Earth-style camera and walked into one of the cities or villages in Switzerland, I suppose, and bought this camera for whatever reason. While Billy was on Semjase's beamship, they were using two Earth-style cameras, since ultimately what Billy would bring back would be our Earth-style photographs. So they do walk among us at times, but according at least to the Meier material, they've left for some reason. What that reason is, I've never learned. Now, Billy met with SFATH for 11 years, and one of the things that SFATH warned him about was something called the third millennium. And it's the time that we're in now. It's the time that the Enoch prophecies have warned us about. And you probably remember the most grim Enoch prophecy, which is Contact 215, describes, and it says something along these lines. It says, the greatest disaster in recorded history will occur in North America when chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons will be released by automated systems that run outside of human control. That's one of the disasters that could happen here in the North American continent. Another prophecy for our time is that America will suffer 2 civil wars and will be divided into, I think, 5 different regions. If things continue on the way they're going, I think that will be very possible. Billy said that the third millennium will be a time of slowly approaching global collapse. There will be a kind of confusion and maliciousness which spreads over the earth. And the people will become obtuse and indolent and indifferent, and while our leadership becomes grandiose in their thinking, they'll take away our rights of self-determination. And this will be the breeding ground for conflicts in the third millennium, and families will break up, and that's the kind of thing that we've seen And we've also seen the damage of the morality of Earth humans. That manifests itself in many ways. One of the things I think is happening, and I haven't really verified this via the Meier material, is that people on the Earth are kind of numbing themselves in order to cope. And what I mean is they are using, alcohol, they're using drugs, even watching sports, certain kinds of music. It's all a big distraction because I think subconsciously we understand that there is an approaching global disaster, and it causes great cognitive dissonance in us if we remain sensitive to it. But it's always a good idea to resist these urges and these degenerate impulses, because we have to remain sensitive, we have to remain alert in order to continue evolving and in order to effectively protect yourself and make good decisions in the third millennium. One of the things we want to remain open to is impulses from the storage banks. Remember, there are planetary storage banks, there are universal storage banks, there's a storage bank for the spiritual teachings called, I believe, the Strudel. The German word for storage bank is Speicherbank. And Billy, as a very young boy growing up in Niederflachs/Bulach, Switzerland, woke up at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. one morning with these very powerful impulses from the storage banks. And a very young boy, he crawled out the window, lower window, went outside. It was a warm evening in May, sat on a bench his father had created, and looked up at this beautiful starry sky. And he heard his own voice say, "Since ancient times I lived among the stars." And he heard his own voice say again, "My life exists because of the love of creation." And this whole experience where Billy was getting these impulses from the storage banks is captured in one of Billy's writings called How It All Began, which you can find up on the Future Mankind site. And Billy stated, "I recognized that the light which the stars emitted was a light in the visible spectrum. However, the light of true love remained invisible, creational, and for all great time." Now, the light we can see with our eyes is in a very narrow range that we call, it's from 400 to 700 nanometers, they call it. There's infrared light, which we don't see. There's kind of electromagnetic light that we don't see. But there is this light that the stars emit that is in the visible spectrum. However, it's interesting, but there's another kind of light that's associated with wisdom and love, and that the Meier material talks about. I was studying that today in Contact Report 10, and it's interesting because light can act like a particle or it can act like a wave. And we can measure the location of a what's called a photon. And when you can measure the location of a photon, that's light behaving as a particle. Now, a photon is considered an elementary particle, meaning that it cannot be broken down anymore as far as we know. They used to think that atoms couldn't be broken down anymore. And then when we split the atom, we found out, whoa, all this energy is released. Well, as far as we know, at this point in our science, a photon is an elementary particle, so it cannot be subdivided because the substructure at this point is unknown. But the strange aspect of light is that it has this strange wave particle duality. And in Contact Report 10, it says wisdom is light. And in this case, Billy, as a very young boy, is sensing this light, this invisible light that's coming from creation itself. And Billy knew at a very young age that everything which exists in the whole universe is a manifestation of the might and the infinite and true love of that mighty universal consciousness. Now, the universal consciousness is mostly just called the creation by these extraterrestrials. But the creation refers to the superintelligence behind all things, as well as the physical universe. So, Billy gets impulses, and got impulses at a very, very young age. And he says, and he explains that all at once he knew what his purpose in life was. He knew what he was going to do in life, and he felt all of these incredible good memories come over him. So we all get impulses, and in fact, it says in the Meier information that all of humanity contains in our subconsciousness impulses that are related to the Vedic writings, impulses that are in our subconsciousness. There is another kind of interesting impulse that is occurring on the Earth, or has occurred. The German word is Bestimmung, and it is translated as determined. It's translated as determination, purpose, appointment, settlement, assignment. Destiny can mean predetermined, usually inevitable, irresistible. But this Bestimmung is destiny vibrations. There are people on the Earth that are getting Bestimmung, destiny vibration. These are the people that were involved in the original codex. A codex is an agreement. And 389,000 years ago, when certain extraterrestrial Lyrians were here, 2 million of them, I think, and they had a civilization here, they violated some rules and some laws, creational natural laws. I believe they abused the Earth humans. They were involved in certain sects with the Earth humans, and they probably something to do with religion as well. But anyway, in Contact 229, it talks about something called the Great Oath. And it says, when the prophet of the new time speaks of codex, as well as oath and law, only a few loyal ones will gather around him, and most human beings will not want to listen to him. At first, only a few human beings will hurry to pursue the truth when he spreads the teaching of the Spirit. For to the many human beings, his voice and teaching will go unheard as if in a desert. And in this story that I've studied in one of the contact notes, two people called Ferdinand and Ingrid, two people that were in Switzerland, that were part of the FIGU, the Free Community of Interests there that supports Billy, had screwed up their destiny vibrations, their Bestimmung, because they were engaged in wild sex with other sex partners. So there are a lot of people on the Earth now that are not paying attention to these impulses. that are resisting these impulses. And in this case, these impulses relate all the way back to about 389,000 years ago, when there were immigrants here from Lyra and Vega. Now, the people that violated these laws, let me read what it says here about this codex. It says, simultaneously they drew up a codex for themselves and all followers, which provided for severest punishment of those who do not strive to make amends for their past mistakes, or who would not pursue the resulting mission. The codex was to be valid for all future times until the days of reparations were completed. So some people on Earth were those people that were here when the Lyrians were here, and they were involved in this agreement. They've died on the Earth. They're part of the reincarnational patterns of Earth, and they are getting these bestimung, these destiny vibrations, and they're supposed to be at the Semjase Silver Star Center fulfilling these destiny vibrations. Most of them are not, or many of them are not. So, but I got off onto this just talking about the storage banks. And how Billy, at a very young age, was impulsed from the storage banks. So anyway, Billy was taught for 11 years by his first extraterrestrial contact, which was a man named SFATH. And then he was told to go up on top of this hill and wait for his next extraterrestrial teacher would send a ship for him. And it was a cold evening in Switzerland, and Billy was about 16 years old. And out of the sky comes this robotic craft, and it lands nearby. And something opens in the ship, and Billy almost feels drawn in. And he sits in this chair, and the entire ship becomes invisible, and his own body becomes invisible. And he is whisked off to a place called Jordan, the country Jordan, and the ship lands, and he steps out, and he recognizes the red rocks and the heat from Jordan, and down out of the sky comes this, what looks like a falling star, and the craft gets bigger and bigger, and it lands, and it's a rather large disc, and it sits there for half an hour and doesn't do anything. And then finally ASKET steps out. Very striking woman. Billy feels like he knows her. Very much so. It's something in his subconscious. So they leave together and they go to Egypt, and she leads him into these old cubicle constructions far below the Giza plateau, where they eventually see the headquarters of the Giza intelligences. And he sees this large hallway that has light coming from everywhere, a large extraterrestrial ship. There's guards around, there's religious artifacts, something that even looks like the cross from the crucifixion, all this bizarre stuff that seems unrelated in some ways, but isn't. I'm going to read something from Guido Musburger's book, and this is on page 229. The book is And Still They Fly, and this is entitled, Who Are the Giza Intelligences? It says, according to their ancestry, the so-called Giza intelligences are in the same lineage as the Pleiadians, who, during prehistoric times, lived in certain areas of the Earth. After a period of peace lasting 18,000 years, power-hungry scientists tried to take control of all of the power, as they had already done in earlier times. Remembering the earlier fate of their ancestors, the people saw through their plans early enough and rebelled. The power-hungry scientists were left with no other alternative but to flee in their spacecraft into the wide expanse of outer space. Their exile took place about 15,000 years ago. This was during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, by the way. The banished scientists settled in the system of Beta Centauri. They created many offsprings and developed technology with amazing capabilities. Their government used all available means to promote insane hatred against the Earth people. So, it's interesting here, it talks about their government using propaganda. And I think we're seeing that today in our society, with the intent of returning to Earth as soon as possible to avenge their banishment and establish a tyranny. Doesn't it seem like the government of Earth today is trying to establish a tyranny? In the Goblet of Truth, it talks about a consciousness-conditioned tyranny, a tyranny that's focused on our thoughts, focused on controlling our thoughts. Let's continue here. The product of their single-mindedness was a people of maliciousness and bestial nature, spurred on by inhuman hatred. They were even able to raise their average lifespan several thousand years. Each and every individual was trained in war actions and taught how to use intrigues to stir up discord and to play one man against another. Doesn't that almost sound like our mainstream media? Stirring up discord? Discipline within their own ranks could only be upheld by laborious efforts and cruel punishments. After 2,000 years, they reached a point where they were able to attack the Earth. And 13,000 years ago, these people, filled with so much hatred, returned to the Earth with their large spacecraft under the leadership of a JHWA Eris I. Now, I've talked about this before. This happened during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, and Eris was an Ishwish who hadn't studied the spiritual teachings very much. He may have been a king of wisdom in the sciences, but he was filled with hatred, and he brought these people back from Beta Centauri, and they were attacking probably both Atlantis and Lemuria, but they focused on Hyperborea first. Remember, before the pole shift, the area that we consider Florida was up by the pole, and the poles were very warm, very beautiful. Eris was a scientist of extreme bestial mentality, and he was called the Barbarian. To assist his plans, he appointed 200 scientists in various specialized fields represented as sub-leaders. In a lightning-fast attack, they invaded the Earth and first conquered the country of Hyperborea, high up in North America, where a very mild climate prevailed at the time. Okay, anyway. The Giza intelligences established themselves, but the Giza intelligences, after the fall of Atlantis and Lemuria, and I won't recap this whole story now, Eris the 11th came back. We just read about Eris the 1st. But after the Great War and the pole shift and the Great Disaster, Eris the 11th came back here. And Eris the 11th, I believe, had a son, Jehovan, and he killed his father, and then there was a son named Jehave, and then Jehave was killed by his son, Erisame. Erisame was really the true starter of the Giza intelligences, and then we have that whole long lineage of these Giza intelligences that existed right up to 1970 or so. Eventually they were banished off the Earth, but they use religions to control the people of the Earth. They use something called telenotic impulses, which are designed to affect our thoughts and affect our minds. And what is happening with a lot of the religions on Earth, particularly the extreme religions, are something called the God Delusion Insanity. And we're seeing, particularly with the extreme Muslim religion, episodes of psychosis, episodes of extreme violence. And this is related to something, again, called the God Delusion Insanity. These religions affect the psyche very, very negatively. And they create a situation, for whatever reason, that we can have almost epileptic or schizophrenic episodes. And that's part of what's happening on the earth, is people are suffering from this. It's like a sickness, and it leads to great, great violence that occurs on the earth. This is all part of this third millennium, a time of confusion, of spreading maliciousness. Now, how do we stop this negative trend? How do we turn the tide so we don't destroy ourselves again in the great global conflagration as did the Atlanteans and the Lemurians? Well, the key to stopping this destruction is what's called the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the life. And Billy started to get the basis for the teaching of the Spirit in his 10th contact with Semjase. And Semjase was Billy's third contact person. Met her the first time in 1975, and she would literally land her beam ship there in Schmid-Ruti, Switzerland, Hinter Schmid-Ruti, and they would meet out in the open. And a lot of times they would have discussions under a tree. And one of the first things that Semjase told Billy about was the human spirit. And she said, every human has within them a spirit that does not die, a spirit that does not sleep, even during our deepest sleep. And she said, if we've learned to pay attention to it, it will tell us if our thinking is right or wrong. She explained that the human spirit is the seat of the infinite. And she said that those who are rich in spirit will become an instrument through which the creation can reveal the spiritual realms. She also told Billy that a human's yearning lies in the joy that remains for the imperishable life, the permanent peace, the spiritual and the consciousness-related wealth that never fades and lasts forever. Now, our human spirit you could think of as a fragment of the universal creation, the universal consciousness. And when spirits first come in, they have no learning whatsoever. And eventually, after millions, billions of reincarnations, we'll merge back with the universal consciousness. And we'll experience once again the imperishable life and the permanent peace where there is no disturbances. If you can imagine an existence with no disturbances. The yearning that we experience is an intense longing. It's a deep longing. Especially, it can be accompanied by tenderness or sadness. And some synonyms for this yearning can include hunger, desire, longing, passion. And the German word sehnen can mean to long, to crave, to pine after. So perhaps this verse is telling us that we are longing for this spiritual existence. And in that spiritual existence, when we're back with creation, we will experience a joy. And joy can be defined as an emotion of well-being or a good fortune. The German word Freud is translated as joy here. And we are said to long for this joy, the joy of the permanent peace, freedom from disturbance, quiet and tranquility. So perhaps in that final state of union with creation, there will no longer be disturbances, if you can imagine. Now, Billy, in his trip on the Great Spacer that we talked about last week in Contact 31, it talks about Billy experiencing this deep tranquility and this unbelievable peacefulness during the hyperleaps on the Great Spacer. And I'll just read a few things that he wrote. He says, "But now I look at everything in peace and with clear eyes, and I can't describe the infinite vastness and the size and the splendor and the beauty of this universe that stretches out before me. The words fail me. This deep tranquility and this unbelievable peacefulness flowing through me is eternity itself. The absolute timelessness, which obviously is no longer subject to outside influences such as restlessness, strife, and worries that trouble our consciousness. I realized suddenly that during these few seconds I was in eternity itself, experiencing myself as eternity, where I only exist as fine matter and I am completely free of all that can influence my material life. I actually traveled to eternity for a few seconds." Now, in the longest hyperleap, Billy described this experience in another way. He said, "This light, this radiant light, such profound love, calm, and peace it has. Oh, now I understand. I can't see or hear, but I am finding. I feel, I live, I am finding. How beautiful is this peace." Now, the word empfinden is a German word. It's described in another one of Billy's writings, in the Goblet of Truth, in chapter 25, verse 137, which says that empfinden is the fine spiritual perceiving of the love of creation. And that leads me to another paragraph in the Goblet of Truth, one of my favorite paragraphs, that is entitled, "What the Truth Knows to Say," that says, "Rivers, stones, lakes, seas, plants, animals, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time which involves many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage to rebirth. Rebirth into the world of pure spirit. And all of these creatures are Weissenheiten that communicate with one another, all knowing about their common existence among another. And they communicate with these psychic swinging waves. So I often tell people to take the time to go into a forest in the evening, a forest where there's some life, and listen. And you'll hear the cicadas, you'll hear the crickets, you'll hear the birds singing, because all of these creatures are connected by these psychic vibrations. Because all of creation is, everything is connected and it's all one. And if you can resensitize yourself to the impulses of creation, then we'll all be better off. But the problem is, here on the earth, during the third millennium, we have shut ourselves off from these impulses from creation. And the passage I was just talking about also discusses a tightly woven web of all life. Now, woven means to interlace, threads, yarns, fibrous material. And to interlace means to cross one another, typically, alternatively, one over another. And that's kind of the connection that this creation has. And we should be able to look at a tree and recognize the love of creation, because love is the highest principle in creation, and everything follows that principle in absolute logic. And every tiny plant and every tiny animal in creation fulfills that purpose that was designed for it by creation. The incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. And creation radiates love. And creation is a tightly woven and indissoluble web of life, where no life form should rise up above the others within their group. If you're impulsed by creation, you will not get involved in something called a sartong, which is inappropriate doings. Because all life is, at the basis of it, is good. Evil is something we learned. We learn. And we here on the earth are suffering from nationalism, fascism, neo-capitalism, and cynical materialism. And Billy describes it this way in the Goblet of Truth. He says, irrespective of what is involved, whether simple or fanatical religions and sects, stubborn nationalism, fascism, might-greedy politics, terrorism, or neo-capitalism, all of these directions are aberrations. Now, an aberration is the act of departing from what is right, normal, and good. And people behave in an abhorrent way when they cut themselves off from these natural impulses of creation. Their consciousness then is kind of devoid of all empathy and compassion and moral reasoning. And we are a society that's fallen into abnormality, eccentricity, illusion, delusion, hallucination. So we're something that's literally deformed. All of these directions are aberrations of the negative and evil, and they represent an immense threat to the peoples of Earth, in particular here in the third millennium. And truly, the danger of a catastrophe befalling humanity has never been so great as it is today. So we are in a very difficult situation indeed here on the earth. Oh, I'm getting a message here. I don't hear a double sound. How are things? Someone let me know here. Hopefully you guys can hear. Let me see if Eve, are you on there?
Yes, I am.
Is the sound? Are we having sound trouble?
No, I don't think so. I think it's me. Yeah, you know, the program, it says when I click on the Skype, it says it turns the sound off, and then it takes me to Skype, and then all of a sudden the sound will come on the program page. So, and I would click out of Skype, and I'd still hear a double sound. So, you know, it's a blog talk thing. So I was just checking everyone else. That's all. We're good.
Well, I appreciate you doing that, though, because I can rattle on here forever, and no one's hearing a damn word I'm saying. All right. Thanks,
You're doing great. You're doing a beautiful job putting this together.
Well, thank you very much, and I always appreciate your help. Thanks for listening. I'll put you back on mute, I guess, unless you want me to just keep you on here.
No, just mute me. Yeah.
Oh, okay, we'll do. All righty. Anyway, thanks very much, Eve, for listening and for being there and helping us out. Let me switch. We got about 15 minutes here. I want to talk about controlling our thoughts, which is which I keep meaning to get back into this book. Billy has 2 great books, and I recommend that you guys order them. One is called The Might of Thoughts, and the other one's called The Psyche. And you can order them at Michael Horn's site. If you Google Michael Horn, you'll find his website. I think it's theyfly.com. 2 great books. One is called The Psyche, and the other one is called The Might of Thoughts. The Psyche is very interesting and very technical in some ways. The first 15 or 20 pages I probably read 20 times, and that's not an exaggeration. We have something called the psyche in the material consciousness. We've talked about the material consciousness before. Every time we reincarnate, we get a new material consciousness. We have the same spirit form, but a new material consciousness, and that material consciousness has to grow up. And while this material consciousness is going from the child stage into the adult stage, it's getting impulses from these storage bags. Now, our human spirit on the other side is untouchable, and it's invulnerable. And it has interaction with something called these swinging waves, in the German, schwingen. These are periodically built up electric and magnetic fields. And these swinging waves can include energies of forces of immense might. And I think what happens, and this is a bit of speculation on my part, but as people incarnate for millions of years and they get up to this 5th stage of evolution where they're kings of wisdom, their material consciousness is able to harness these swinging waves. And they can do telekinesis. They can move things with their mind. In physics, a wave is a disturbance. It's an oscillation which travels through space. And space, of course, has basically 3 dimensions, and the 4th dimension is space-time. And it's interesting, but in the Meier information it says the spirit itself is a minute piece of creation, which in no way can be disturbed or negatively affected by anything in the spiritual realm. Now, the thing that corresponds to the psyche is something called the Gemut, and the Gemut is part of our spiritual body, and it regulates spirit-based consciousness, feelings, and thoughts. But this Gemut can't be influenced by negative powers, only neutral positive ones. And the Gemut is what supplies the psyche with these harmonious swinging waves. I'm not sure at this point of our evolution how much we use these harmonious swinging waves. Maybe we do while we're learning. But I think eventually we can really harness these. And these psychic swinging waves, they originate from something called the realm of electromagnetic life energy. So the Gemut, again, is referred to as the spiritual block where the spirit body of a life form, in this case the human being, the Gemut regulates and looks after the spirit consciousness-based feelings and thoughts. Now the spirit form isn't really conscious the way a material consciousness is. The spirit form only evolves through a material consciousness, and that's why we have to incarnate materially. And the spirit form on the spirit side is processes all these life experiences and turns them into these evolutive values or these consciousness values which are stored in the spirit form. So that's kind of the interchange between what we have as the material consciousness, the psyche, the Gemut, which is kind of our spiritual consciousness. So just keep in mind that we have both of these, the material consciousness and the spiritual consciousness. And our thoughts are much like a garden. We have to learn to clarify our thoughts. We have to continue to evaluate our thoughts. Are our thoughts neutral, positive? Are they of a healthy nature? Elizabeth Moosbrugger wrote in The Might of Thoughts, she wrote like the foreword or something, the dedication, I think it was, and she said that this book, meaning The Might of Thoughts, is dedicated to a humankind that is ill in its consciousness, so that it finds again the creational natural way which it lost so long ago. Asartung means to get very bad out of the control of the good human nature, and that's where society is heading now. So we have to evaluate our thoughts, because our thoughts can be very overly positive or very negative. And these thoughts weigh us down, and they tend to multiply, and they get larger, like a giant weed. So we need to reach in, evaluate these thoughts, and learn to rip them out and kill those thoughts, just like you destroy the weeds in your garden. Otherwise, those weeds start to choke out all of your healthy thinking. There is a negative repeating thought that can occur with people. And this occurs when people get a little bit obsessed with the negative. And we all have done such a thing. Let me read here what it says about this. It says, the thoughts are thereby forced into a cycle in which the same thoughts and themes of thoughts appear over and over again, whereby a rotation of the thoughts is practically called forth. And once such a rotation of thoughts has begun to operate, then the human being who is controlled by it is barely able to free himself from it and turn his thoughts back into a positive way. So these thoughts are almost, they can snowball, like a snowball rolling down a hill. And if we let these thoughts continue, we can fall prey to insanity, delusion, a psychological disorder, a psychic illness. If we let these thoughts proliferate like wildly growing weeds, they will displace everything in your psyche. Now, Eve had sent me some really important information that Billy has written. Let me read this. Something like a universal evil does not exist, but there exists an energy block around the planet that consists of the religious delusion and nonsense and other negative thoughts emanated by the human beings who are thinking on such lines. The people who are living and held in bondage by the belief systems are constantly influenced by that negative block of energy, like in a vicious cycle. Entities like the devil, Satan, demons, etc. are nothing real, but without exception just figments of religious delusion and imagination. Breaking this cycle, the cycle of thoughts that we're talking about, will begin in about 800 years from now on a larger scale. People will start to occupy themselves with the realization that there is truth. But until the broad masses succeed in profoundly thinking about the truth, much more time will pass. So, we are in the third millennium, unfortunately, and during this third millennium, most Earth humans are going to be influenced by this negative energy which surrounds the planet. I want to thank everybody that came to the chat room. Eve, we got a couple guests out there, and Tobias Davidson, and probably a bunch of other folks listening out of the chat room. And I want to thank all the folks that are going to listen to this archive. And I'm going to be on Revolution Radio tonight. That's freedomslits.com, Studio B, 8 p.m. Eastern. Got a new guest on, guy with the website, talking about all the crazy stuff that's going on in regards to spaceflight right now, which we don't hear about. His name is Jason Riant. And then the first hour, I will continue talking about some of the stuff that we've been talking about this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the show. My name is Mark Snyder. Have a good evening.